Okay, ladies and gents, a recap of our reading before. You guys know how I recap. I would do it with a quiz. This quiz actually won't be for credit, but this is what I would have asked. Number one, our narrator learns the first bit of information about Ethan Frome from what person in the town. Number two, our narrator stays or resides with whom in the town. Number three, our narrator leaves a volume of what magazine behind that Ethan picks up. And four, there was an article on the recent discoveries in what science. Five, we found out that Ethan Frome actually did leave Starkville, Massachusetts, and spend some time where? You guys know there would have been many more questions, but those would have been the crux, and this is why. First of all, we find out that Ethan Frome has left Starkville and gone to Florida. Why is that important? Well, because Harmon Gow says the smart ones get away. He spent way too many winters here, but we know he got away. That little bit of information should have led you to so many more questions. Why in the heck does this man back? Why is he here? What is this mashup? Two, he read, it was a book, it was a volume of popular science, and it was an article on biochemistry that he was reading. Biochemistry. So we know that he left, and we know that he has some sort of education which is grander than Starkfield, which should have once again brought you to the question of why he is here. Now, our first person that he gets, our narrator gets information from is Harmon Gow. Our narrator lives with Mrs. Ned Hale, right? So this is how the pre-story is sort of set up, and he's trying to figure out what's going on. So remember, Ethan has been giving a ride to Corbury Junction back and forth every day. Snowstorm comes in. They're stuck at Ethan's home. And that evening is when he begins to get the information on what actually happened. Now, as we begin reading in my next portion of this, it's very important that you remember this is Ethan Frome's version of what happened. The village lay under 2 feet of snow, with drifts at the windy corners. In a sky of iron, the points of the dipper hung like icicles, and Orion flashed his cold fires. The moon had set, but the night was so transparent that the white house fronts between the elms looked gray against the snow. Clumps of bushes made black stains on it, and the basement windows of the church sent shafts of yellow light far across the endless undulations. Young Ethan Frome, and I remember, this is how many years ago? Just over 24 years ago was this smash up. Young Ethan Frome walked at a quick pace along the deserted street, past the bank and Michael Eady's new brick store and Lawyer Varnum's house, with the 2 black Norway spruces at the gate. Opposite the Varnum gate, where the road fell away toward the Corbury Valley, the church reared its slim white steeple and narrow peristyle. As the young man walked toward it, the upper windows drew a black arcade along the side wall of the window. But from the lower openings, on the side where the ground sloped steeply down to the Corbury Road, the light shot its long bars, illuminating many fresh furrows, and the track leading to the basement door, and showing under an adjoining shed a line of sleighs with heavy, blanketed horses. The night was perfectly still, and the air so dry and pure that it gave little sensation of cold. The effect produced on Frome was rather of a complete absence of atmosphere, as though nothing less tenuous than ether intervened between the white earth under his feet and the metallic dome overhead. It's like being in an exhausted receiver, he thought. 4 or 5 years earlier, he had taken a year's course at a technical college at Worcester and dabbled in the laboratory with the friendly professor of physics. And the images supplied by that experience still cropped up at unexpected moments. Through the totally different associations of thought in which he had since been living, his father's death and the misfortunes following it had put a premature end to Ethan's studies. But though they had not gone far enough to be of much practical use, they had fed his fancy and made him aware of huge cloudy meanings behind the daily face of things. So this little bit of time spent at Worcester School, dabbling in physics and learning about things which go beyond his small farm and his small provincial life, had given him just enough taste. Had given him just a glimpse of a grander world. So here Ethan is, forced in his mind, back to rescue, back to take care of his ailing father. So now we know what brought him back, those family ties. As he strode along through the snow, the sense of such meanings glowed in his brain and mingled with the bodily flush produced by his sharp tramp. At the end of the village, he paused before the darkened front of the church. He stood there a moment, breathing quickly, and looking up and down the street, in which not another figure moved. The pitch of the Corbury Road, below Lawyer Varnum's spruces, was the favorite coasting ground of Starkville. And on clear evenings, the church corner rang till late with the shouts of the coasters. But tonight not a sled darkened the whiteness of the long declivity. The hush of midnight lay on the village, and all its waking life was gathered behind the church windows, from which strains of dance music flowed with the broad bands of yellow light. The young man, skirting the side of the building, went down the slope toward the basement door to keep out of range of the revealing rays. From the revealing rays, from within he made a circuit through the untrodden snow and gradually approached the farther angle of the basement wall. Thence, still hugging the shadow, he edged his way cautiously forward to the nearest window, holding back his straight spare body, craning his neck till he got a glimpse of the room. So he's outside of his dance, just trying to look in. Seen thus, from the pure and frosty darkness in which he stood, it seemed to be seething in a mist of heat. The metal reflectors of the gas jet sent crude waves of light against the whitewashed walls, and the iron flanks of the stove at the end of the hall looked as though they were heaving with volcanic fires. The floor was thronged with girls and young men. Down the side wall, facing the window, stood a row of kitchen chairs, for which the older women had just risen. By this time, the music had stopped, and the musicians, a fiddler and the young lady who played the harmonium on Sundays, were hastily refreshing themselves at one corner of the supper table, which lined its devastated pie dishes and ice cream saucers on the platform at the end of the hall. The guests were preparing to leave, and the tide had already set toward the passage where coats and wraps were hung, when a young man with a sprightly foot and a shock of black hair shot in the middle of the floor and clapped his hands. The signal took instant effect. The musicians hurried to their instruments. The dancers, some already half muffled for departure, fell into line down each side of the room. The older spectators slipped back to their chairs, and the lively young man, after diving about here and there in the throng, drew forth a girl who had already wound a cherry-colored fascinator about her head, and leading her up to the end of the floor, whirled her down its length to the bounding tune of a Virginia reel. Frome's heart was beating fast. He had been straining for a glimpse of the dark head under the cherry-colored scarf, and it vexed him that another eye should have been quicker than his. The leader of the reel, who looked as if he had Irish blood in his veins, danced well, and his partner caught his fire. As she passed down the line, her light figure swinging from hand to hand in circles of increasing swiftness. The scarf flew off her head and stood out behind her shoulders, and Frome at each turn caught sight of her laughing, panting lips. The cloud of dark hair about her forehead and the dark eyes which seemed the only fixed points in a maze of flying lines. The dancers were going faster and faster, and the musicians, to keep up with them, belabored their instruments like jockeys lashing their mounts on the home stretch. Yet it seemed to the young man at the window that the reel would never end. Now and then he turned his eyes from the girl's face to that of her partner, which, in the exhilaration of the dance, had taken on a look of almost impudent ownership. Dennis Eady was the son of Michael Eady. The ambitious Irish grocer, with suppleness and effrontery, had given Starkfield its first notion of his smart business methods, and whose new brick store testified to the success of the attempt. His son seemed likely to follow in his steps, and was meanwhile applying the same arts to the conquest of the Starkfield maidenhood. Hitherto, Ethan Frome had been content to think him a mean fellow, but now he positively invited a horsewhipping. It was strange that the girl did not seem aware of it, that she could lift her rapt face to her dancers and drop her hands into his, without appearing to feel the offense of his look and touch. So, Ethan is outside of this dance just watching her dance. Now, much like the green light or the fish, the only thing of color and vibrance in this whole book is going to be this red scarf, this red shawl wrapped around Maddie Silver's shoulders. And Ethan is just enthralled, and he hates Dennis Eady. He hates Dennis Eady for his money. He hates Dennis Eady for his suave demeanor. He hates Dennis Eady for holding her hand. He hates Dennis Eady for being single and having an opportunity. And he's just watching, sitting in his own desire. Frome was in the habit of walking into Starkfield to fetch home his wife's cousin, Maddie Silver. Yeah, the girl that he wants is his wife's cousin. On the rare evenings when some chance of amusement drew her to the village, it was his wife who had suggested, when the girl came to live with them, that such opportunities should be put in her way. Maddie Silver came from Stamford, and when she entered the Frome's household to act as her cousin Zena's aide, it was thought best, as she came without pay, not to let her feel too sharp a contrast between the life she had left and the isolation of a Starkfield farm. But for this, as Frome sardonically reflected, it would hardly have occurred to Zena to take any thought of the girl's amusement. When his wife first proposed that they should give Maddie an occasional evening out, he had inwardly demurred at having to do the extra 2 miles to the village and back after his hard day on the farm. But not long afterward, he had reached the point of wishing that Starkfield might give all its nights to revelry. Maddie Silver had lived under his roof for a year, and from early morning till they met at supper, he had frequent chances of seeing her, but no moments in her company were comparable to those when, her arm in his, and her light step flying to keep time with his long stride, they walked back through the night to the farm. He had taken to the girl from the first day, when he had driven over to the flats to meet her, and she had smiled and waved to him from the train, crying out, "You must be Ethan," as she jumped down with her bundles while he reflected, looking over her slight person. So, I'm going to cut this one into 2, and I'm going to bring in my actors here. But the setup, Ethan has been married to Zena. Zena has Maddie Silver come to live with them. Ethan, for this year, has been doing nothing but wishing every moment to be with her. has been doing nothing but thinking of her. So, some questions must arise. 1, is Ethan just a bad dude? I mean, he's married to this woman who brings in her wife's cousin to help care for her, and he develops a love for her. Is Xena as horrible as Ethan paints her to be? Does Maddie Silver know what's going on? Is she complicit in what is happening? We're going to continue going here. I'm going to bring in my actors, and we'll continue to evolve this story. But remember those questions. Basically, am I on Team Ethan? Do I think that it's okay to reach out for something, even though it may not be appropriate? Am I on Team Xena? No matter what, you should keep your commitments, especially those of marriage. Am I on Team Maddie? She's just innocent and has nothing to do with this. Knows nothing at all. Or is she a home wrecker? All right, we'll continue.